Picture a coal train 4,000 tons heavy clawing up a mountain grade before sunrise, and a single machine dragging it into the light. The 1980s was the decade the diesel locomotive stopped being simple and started to think. It was a war. General Motors versus General Electric, brute horsepower versus silicon brains, reliability versus reinvention, and a handful of legends were caught in the crossfire. These 10 machines didn't just move freight, they decided who would rule the rails for the next 40 years. Number 10. EMD SD50. We start with a gamble that didn't quite pay off. By the early 1980s, Electromotive Division, the locomotive arm of General Motors, had ruled American railroading for decades. But General Electric was closing in fast, and EMD needed something bigger, newer, and more powerful to hold the line. Their answer was the SD50. Introduced in May 1981 as the flagship of EMD's new 50 series, the SD50 was a 6-axle CC machine rated at 3,500 horsepower, later bumped to 3,600. It was a transitional design, sitting right between the trusted -2 locomotives of the 1970s and the fully computer-controlled units that were coming next. On paper, it was everything a railroad could want. More power squeezed out of the same 16-cylinder 645 series engine, wrapped in a familiar body. But the SD50 has a reputation, and it isn't a kind one. Pushing the aging 645 engine to 3,500-plus horsepower strained it hard. Railroads reported engine trouble, cracked crankshafts, and electronic gremlins. It became one of the most controversial locomotives EMD ever built, a unit many enthusiasts point to as the moment GE began seriously eating into EMD's crown. More than 400 were built before production ended in January 1986, going to major railroads like Conrail, the Chessie system, the Denver and Rio Grande Western, and the Seaboard system. Here's the twist: many of them are still working today. Railroads like CSX and Norfolk Southern rebuilt and derated them, dropping the horsepower to make them reliable. NS calls its rebuilds the SD40E, so the SD50 failed as a flagship, but succeeded as a survivor, and that alone earns it a spot on this list. Number 9. GE C39-8. If the SD50 was EMD stumbling, this next machine was General Electric charging. Meet the C39-8, the locomotive that quietly kicked off the microprocessor era. GE had spent the 1970s clawing its way up with the -7 line. But the company knew the future wasn't just about horsepower, it was about control. So GE built a brand new series, the -8, and the C39-8 was one of its first mass-produced children. Built between 1984 and 1987, it was a 6-axle 3,900 horsepower unit powered by GE's 16-cylinder 7FDL engine. What made it special wasn't under the hood, it was in the electronics. The -8 line brought serious onboard microprocessor control to freight railroading, managing the engine and the electrical system with a precision older locomotives simply couldn't match. This was the beginning of the smart locomotive, and it pointed straight at the way every modern engine works today. Only 161 C39-8s were built, and just 2 railroads originally bought them, Conrail and Norfolk Southern. Norfolk Southern loved theirs enough to take well over 100 units. Toward the end of the run, GE offered an improved version, the C39-8E, or enhanced, built closer to the specs of the next model coming down the line. The C39-8 wasn't a huge seller, and it wasn't the prettiest thing on the rails, but it was a proof of concept, a test bed on steroids that showed the industry GE could out-engineer the giant. The unit soldiered on into the 2000s before retirement swept most of them away between 2004 and 2008. Their real legacy: they opened the door for the locomotive that would make GE the #1 builder in America. But we'll get to that one. Number 8. British Rail Class 58. Let's cross the Atlantic. In the early 1980s, British Rail had a problem. The coal boom was booming, trains were getting heavier, and British Rail needed a cheap, tough, easy-to-fix freight hauler that could run for decades. Their existing Class 56 had a rocky start, so engineers went back to the drawing board and borrowed an idea from America. The result was the Class 58, and it looked like nothing else on British rails. Built at Brill's Doncaster Works between 1983 and 1987, it was a Cocoa diesel electric with a narrow body and a cab at each end, mounted on a strong American-style frame that carried all the weight. Enthusiasts took one look at that skinny bodywork and nicknamed them Bones. 50 were built, numbered 58 Aero Del 1 to 58 Aero 50, powered by a Ruston-Paxman 12-cylinder engine producing 3,300 horsepower, driving through brush electrical gear. The genius was in the modular design. External walkways and removable side panels meant a broken component could be swapped out fast. Even the cabs were designed to be replaced after an accident. This was maintenance made simple and cheap. There was a bigger dream behind the bones too. British Rail wanted to break into the export market, and the pre-production drawings actually referred to them as standard export locomotives. The plan was to sell these to the world. That never happened. The export orders didn't come, and the Class 58 became the last diesel locomotive ever assembled at Doncaster. Even at home, their career was cut short. All 50 were withdrawn in the UK by 2002 after less than 20 years, replaced by a newer American import you'll hear about very shortly. But the story didn't end there. Dozens were shipped across the Channel to work construction and freight in France, Spain, and the Netherlands, including hauling trains for the building of France's high-speed lines. A humble British coal hauler, exported after all. Number 7. EMD GP38-2. Not every legend is glamorous. Some are legends precisely because they're not. The EMD GP38-2 is the definition of a workhorse, the four-axle everyman that hauled the 1980s one boxcar at a time. Built from 1972 all the way to 1986, the GP38-2 was part of EMD's hugely successful -2 line. It's a four-axle BB road switcher powered by a 16-cylinder 645 engine. But here's the key detail. That engine is not turbocharged. It uses a simpler Roots-type blower, producing a modest 2,000 horsepower. And that modest is exactly the point. By skipping the turbocharger, EMD made a locomotive that was simpler, cheaper to run, and famously hard to break. It didn't have the raw grunt of the big six-axle units, but it didn't need to. For local freights, yard work, branch lines, transfer runs, and general merchandise duty, the GP38-2 was perfect, reliable, versatile, and honest. Railroads bought them by the truckload. More than 2,200 were built, going to giants like Conrail and Union Pacific and dozens of smaller lines. Through the entire decade, if you stood at a grade crossing anywhere in North America, there was a very good chance a GP38-2 was one of the units rumbling past. And here's what really cements its place on this list. It never really left. Decades later, the GP38-2 is still everywhere. Class 1 railroads, regionals, and short lines all still run them, many with millions of miles on the clock. Some have been rebuilt, but plenty are still doing the exact same honest work they did in 1985. In a decade obsessed with more horsepower and more computers, the GP38-2 proved that sometimes the smartest locomotive is the simplest one. Number 6. EMD F40PH. So far it's been all freight. But the 1980s had a passenger icon too, and it screamed. This is the EMD F40PH, the machine that became the face of American passenger rail. Amtrak's early years were rough. Its first big passenger locomotive, the SDP-40F, developed a terrifying habit of derailing, and railroads lost confidence in it fast. Amtrak needed something dependable, and quickly. The answer, first delivered in 1976 and built into 1988, was the F40PH. Underneath, it was clever and simple. EMD essentially took its reliable GP42 freight locomotive, wrapped it in a full-width cowl body, geared it for speed, and added head-end power. That's the H in the name. Head-end power meant the locomotive generated the electricity to heat, cool, and light the passenger cars directly. No separate generator car needed. It was a four-axle unit producing 3,000 horsepower, later 3,200 in the F40PH2. And then there's the sound. To supply that head-end power, the F40H's engine ran flat out at full RPM even while sitting still, which gave it a relentless howling roar. Rail fans lovingly nicknamed it the Screamer. If you rode Amtrak in the 1980s, that scream is the sound you remember. The severe winter of 1976–77 sealed its fate as a hero. With older steam-heated cars failing in the cold, the modern F40H has stepped up and carried the network. Amtrak bought hundreds, and around 475 were built in total by EMD. For roughly 2 decades, the F40PH was Amtrak, pulling everything from short corridor runs to long-distance flagships coast to coast. It hung on until the Genesis units replaced it, with the last regular Amtrak runs in the early 2000s. But its second life is remarkable. Huge numbers were sold to commuter railroads, and to this day the F40PH still hauls commuters on lines like Chicago's Metra. 40+ years later, the screamer still screams. Number 5. GE-840C. Remember when I said the C39-8 opened a door? This is what walked through it. The GE-840C, often just called the C48, was the locomotive that turned General Electric from the underdog into the champion. Introduced in 1987, right at the tail end of the decade, the C48 took everything GE had learned from its -8 experiments and productionized it. It was a 6-axle CC unit producing a full 4,000 horsepower from the trusty 16-cylinder 7FDL engine, and crucially, it carried the refined microprocessor control that made the -8 line so effective. It managed power, wheel slip, and the electrical system with a finesse that older locomotives couldn't touch. This was the moment GE's long climb paid off. Railroads bought the C48 and its variants in enormous numbers. Over 600 of the standard C48 alone were built between 1987 and 1992, and thousands more came when you count the wide cab and higher horsepower spin-offs. Where the SD50 had stumbled and the C39-8 had proven the concept, the C48 delivered reliability and power and smarts all at once. The timing is the whole story. For decades, EMD had been the undisputed number 1, and GE was the challenger nobody took quite seriously. But the -8 series flipped that. By the end of the 1980s and into the 90s, General Electric had overtaken General Motors to become the largest builder of locomotives in the United States, a position it would hold for a generation. So while the C48 lived mostly at the very end of our decade, it defined the 1980s in the most important way possible. It settled the war. Every EMD engineer sweating over the SD50 and SD60 was really fighting to stop this exact machine. They lost. The C48 is the sound of the balance of power shifting for good. Number 4. British Rail Class 59. Now here's a story that changed the rules, not just about a locomotive, but about who's even allowed to own one. This is the British Rail Class 59, and it started a quiet revolution. In the early 80s, a quarrying company called Foster Yeoman was hauling stone out of its Somerset quarry, and it was fed up. British Rail's locomotives kept breaking down. At one low point, huge numbers of Foster Yeoman's trains were running late. So the company did something unheard of. It decided to buy its own locomotives and demand a guaranteed 95% reliability. British firms couldn't promise that. So Foster Yeoman turned to America, to Electromotive Division. EMD took its rock-solid SD40-2 freight locomotive and completely redesigned it to fit the tight British loading gauge. That meant tens of thousands of hours of engineering work to shrink an American machine down to British dimensions, adding British braking and safety systems, and even copying the cab layout of the Class 58 so British drivers would feel at home. The result was designated the JT26CWSS, a CoCo producing 3,300 horsepower. The first 4 were custom-built at EMD's LaGrange, Illinois plant by a small team of just 21 people, and they arrived at Southampton docks in January 1986, entering regular service that February. And this is the historic part. The Class 59 was the first privately owned diesel locomotive and the first American-built diesel to run regularly on the British Main Line. They were a triumph. That 95% reliability target, EMD hit it. The locomotives were so dependable that other quarrying and power companies followed Foster Yeoman's lead and bought their own. Just 15 Class 59s were ever built, a tiny number, but their impact was enormous. Their bulletproof reputation is exactly what convinced British operators to trust EMD again, opening the door for one of the best-selling locomotives in British history, the Class 66, which came a decade later and took over the entire country. The Class 59 was the seed. 15 little machines that quietly rewrote British railroading. Number 3. GE C37. To understand why the 1980s was a war, you have to meet the locomotive that made it a fair fight. Before the fancy microprocessors, before the -8s, GE broke EMD's stranglehold with a big, honest, hard-working brute, the C37. Built from 1976 through 1986, the C37 was the backbone of GE's -7 line right through the heart of our decade. It was a 6-axle CC unit producing 3,000 horsepower from the 16-cylinder 7FDL engine, a direct evolution of GE's earlier U-series U-boats, but refined, strengthened, and made far more competitive. Here's why it matters. For decades, if you wanted a reliable road locomotive, you bought EMD. GE was the perennial number 2, the alternative you settled for. The C37 changed that conversation. It offered comparable horsepower to EMD's SD40-2, paired with aggressive pricing and attractive financing and maintenance deals. Railroads that had never seriously considered GE started signing on, and they bought a lot of them. Over 1,100 C37s were built, making it one of GE's most successful models of the era. They went to a who's who of American railroading and became a common sight on heavy freight and coal drags across the country, their distinctive high tractive effort making them excellent luggers. They even found homes overseas, working in countries from Brazil to Estonia. The C37 didn't have a computer brain. It didn't need one to make history. Its job was to prove that GE could go head-to-head with the king and win business on merit, and it did exactly that. Every sale chipped away at EMD's dominance and set up the showdown that would define the rest of the decade. Without the plain, powerful, dependable C37 softening up the market in the early 80s, the -8 revolution that followed might never have found an audience. This is the locomotive that turned a one-horse race into a genuine rivalry. Number 2. EMD SD60. At number 2 is the sound of EMD fighting back after the troubled SD50 nearly handed the whole market to GE. The Locomotive knew it couldn't afford another stumble. It needed a clean sheet answer. It got one, the SD60. Introduced in 1984 and built all the way to 1995, the SD60 looked almost identical to the SD50 from the outside. But underneath, it was a completely different animal, and it fixed the biggest flaw of its predecessor. The SD50 had failed because EMD pushed the old 645 engine too hard. So for the SD60, EMD introduced an all-new prime mover, the 16-cylinder 710 engine, producing 3,800 horsepower with far more room to breathe and far better reliability. Just as importantly, the SD60 finally gave EMD a real answer to GE's electronics. It carried a modern computer-controlled electrical system, dragging Electromotives squarely into the microprocessor age. This was EMD's redemption locomotive, bigger, smarter, and dramatically more dependable than the SD50 that had wounded the company's reputation. And the numbers backed it up. The SD60 was seriously efficient. On one railroad's own figures, a pair of SD60s could be up to 16% more fuel efficient than 3 older SD40s pulling the same coal train. In a decade where railroads were merging, cost-cutting, and desperate to burn less fuel, that kind of math sold locomotives. 2 new units doing the work of 3 old ones was exactly the pitch railroads wanted to hear. Major railroads bought the SD60 and its variants in strong numbers, and the 710 engine at its heart went on to power EMD's locomotives for decades afterward. It became the foundation the company was rebuilt on. The SD60 didn't win the war against GE outright. The -8 was simply too strong. But it stopped the bleeding, restored EMD's credibility, and kept Electromotive in the fight. Sometimes the most important machine isn't the one that wins, it's the one that refuses to lose. Number 1. EMD SD40-2. And at number 1, there was only ever going to be one machine. If a single locomotive can be said to define North American railroading, not just the 1980s, but the whole era around it, it is the EMD SD40-2. Introduced back in 1972 and built into 1989, the SD40-2 spent the entire 1980s as the undisputed workhorse of the continent. It's a 6-axle siege unit producing 3,000 horsepower from a 16-cylinder 645 engine and part of EMD's -2 line, which brought in modular plug-in electronics that made the locomotive easier to maintain and famously dependable. But specs don't explain the legend. Volume does. More than 4,000 SD40-2s were built, a staggering number that made it one of the best-selling diesel locomotives in history, second only to EMD's own GP9. Practically every major railroad in the United States and Canada ran fleets of them. Union Pacific, Burlington Northern, Canadian Pacific, Canadian National. The SD40-2 was the standard against which every other locomotive was measured. Why did railroads love it so much? Because it was the perfect balance. Enough power for almost any job, mounted on EMD's excellent HTC truck for superb pulling ability, and reliability so good that crews and mechanics trusted it completely. It wasn't the most powerful locomotive of its day, and by the mid-80s it wasn't the newest technology either. It simply worked every single day, in every kind of weather, on every kind of train. Its influence went global. Remember the Class 59 that revolutionized British freight? That was built on SD40-2 mechanics. Versions and derivatives ran on every continent. And here's the ultimate proof of the legend. Decades later, the SD40-2 is still out there, rebuilt, refurbished, and still earning its keep on railroads and lease fleets around the world, long after flashier machines were scrapped. The SD40-2 is the definition of a classic, the honest, unbreakable icon that carried the freight of a continent through the entire decade. It didn't need computers or gimmicks, it just needed to show up and pull, and it did, better than anything before or since. Now I want to hear from you. Which of these was your favorite? Did I leave off a classic that you think defined the decade? Drop it in the comments. And if you enjoyed this ride, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you down the line.